"We've decided it would be better if you didn't come on the cruise, Mom." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath as I stood in my son's kitchen, the celebratory cake I'd baked still in my hands. 30 minutes earlier, I'd arrived at James's house vibrating with excitement, eager to discuss final plans for the Mediterranean cruise we'd been talking about for 10 years. The cruise my late husband had dreamed of taking me on. The cruise my son had repeatedly promised would happen someday. Someday had finally arrived, or so I thought. "I don't understand," I managed, setting down the cake before my trembling hands dropped it. "The cruise is next week. I've already bought new luggage. I've been researching shore excursions for months." James couldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "It's complicated. Victoria feels this should be a trip focused on our immediate family. The kids, her and me, a chance to really bond." "I'm not family?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "Of course you are, but..." He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Victoria thinks you sometimes become the center of attention, especially with the kids. She wants this trip to establish our family unit without distractions." Distractions. Is that what I'd been reduced to? A distraction? I thought of Richard, my husband of 40 years, whispering from his hospital bed. "Promise me you'll see the Mediterranean someday, Ellie. Promise me you'll stand on those cliffs in Santorini and remember us." I thought of James holding my hand at the funeral, vowing through his tears, "I'll take you on that cruise, Mom. Dad would want that." 10 years of that promise being deferred, while James built his architecture firm, while he navigated his divorce from Melissa, while he established his new life with Victoria. 10 years of me patiently waiting, never complaining, always understanding, and now, 1 week before departure, I was being uninvited. "I see," I said quietly, years of practiced composure allowing me to maintain dignity despite the shattering inside. "I understand. Mom, please don't be upset. We'll plan another trip, just you and me, maybe next year." "It's fine, James." I managed a smile that felt like broken glass. "It's your family vacation. I want you all to enjoy it." I left shortly after, driving home on autopilot, the crushing weight of rejection making it difficult to breathe. In my 65 years, I'd endured many losses. My parents, my beloved Richard, friends to illness and distance. But something about this particular betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a cruise being taken away. It was the callous breaking of a sacred promise. It was my son choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's heart. It was the realization that in my new role as mother-in-law, grandmother, widow, I had somehow become expendable. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold before me, when my phone rang. The name on the screen was unexpected. Melissa Collins, James's ex-wife and mother of my grandchildren. We'd maintained a warm relationship after their divorce 3 years ago, bonded by our love for Linda and Noah, but she rarely called this late. "Elaine? I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her familiar voice came through, tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Not at all, dear. Is everything all right with the children?" "The kids are fine, but..." She paused. "Linda told me what James did, about the cruise." My throat tightened. "Oh, that." "It's despicable," Melissa said, unexpected heat in her voice. "That cruise has been your dream since Richard died. James has promised it to you for years. How dare he exclude you because Victoria feels threatened by her children's love for their grandmother?" I hadn't realized Linda knew about the uninvitation, much less that she'd told her mother. The thought of my granddaughter witnessing this rejection added another layer to my pain. "These things happen," I offered weakly. "Family dynamics can be complicated." "Bull," Melissa replied with characteristic directness. "This isn't about family dynamics. It's about Victoria systematically isolating James from anyone she perceives as competition. First me, then the children when they're with me, and now you." Her assessment aligned with concerns I'd had, but never voiced. Over the 2 years since James had married Victoria, I'd watched my role in his life diminish steadily. Sunday dinners becoming monthly, then occasional, calls growing shorter, invitations arriving with conditions or at the last minute. But I'd swallowed my hurt, not wanting to be the stereotypical interfering mother-in-law. "I have a proposition for you," Melissa continued, a new note in her voice that sounded almost like mischief. Something that might solve this situation in an unexpected way. What do you mean? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow? Noon at Bellini's? I suppose so, I replied, curiosity temporarily overshadowing my heartache. Perfect. And Elaine? Don't pack away that new luggage just yet. After we hung up, I sat puzzled by the cryptic conversation. What could Melissa possibly have in mind? Whatever it was, it seemed unlikely to heal the fresh wound of my son's betrayal. I couldn't have imagined then how wrong I was, or that in exactly 7 days, I would be standing on the deck of the Mediterranean Princess, watching my son's face transform with shock as he realized who would be joining him on his family-only cruise. Sometimes life delivers the most perfect justice in the most unexpected packages. And sometimes that package includes a first-class ticket to the vacation of your dreams, with the last person your son's wife would ever want to see on board. Bellini's was bustling with its usual lunchtime crowd when I arrived the next day. I spotted Melissa immediately, her dark hair pulled back in its characteristic neat ponytail, a stack of papers spread before her at a corner table. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman comfortable in her own skin, a quality I'd always admired in my former daughter-in-law. "Thank you for coming," she said, rising to embrace me warmly. "I ordered you an iced tea. Still your favorite, right?" "Some things never change," I replied with a small smile, settling into the chair across from her. After placing our food orders, Melissa leaned forward, an intensity in her expression I hadn't seen before. "Before I explain my proposition, I need to tell you something that happened last week." She described receiving notification of a substantial educational grant, $50,000 awarded for the literacy program she'd developed as an elementary school teacher. "It's a huge honor," she explained. "The funds are meant for expanding the program, but they included a personal stipend as recognition of my work." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. Melissa had always been passionate about education, often developing creative approaches that her more traditional colleagues dismissed. It was gratifying to see her innovation recognized. "The timing was interesting," she continued. "I received the notification the same day Linda called me in tears, telling me James had uninvited you from the cruise." I winced. I didn't realize Linda knew about that. She overheard James and Victoria arguing about it. Apparently, Victoria insisted, and James eventually gave in. Melissa's expression hardened slightly. It's not the first time she's manipulated him into cutting family ties. Something in her tone made me look up sharply. "What do you mean?" Melissa hesitated. "I've tried to stay out of James's relationship with Victoria. What happened between us was painful enough without me interfering in his new marriage. But lately," she sighed, "Victoria has been subtly undermining my time with the kids, scheduling special family outings during my visitation weekends, making the children feel guilty for enjoying time at my home, suggesting that my apartment isn't suitable for them." This aligned with concerning comments Linda and Noah had made during our time together, references to Victoria criticizing their clothes after visits with their mother, complaining about having to deal with 2 households, suggesting they call her Mom instead of Victoria. "James allows this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My son, for all his wonderful qualities, had always sought the path of least resistance in his personal relationships. "He's conflict-averse," Melissa said diplomatically, "and Victoria is persuasive." The waiter arrived with our salads, providing a momentary pause in the conversation. After he departed, Melissa pulled a glossy brochure from her stack of papers and slid it across the table to me. My breath caught. The Mediterranean Princess gleamed on the cover, the same cruise ship James and his family would be boarding in 6 days. "I don't understand," I said, looking up in confusion. Melissa's eyes sparkled with determination. "I've booked a suite on this cruise, the Neptune suite, actually, the most luxurious accommodation on the ship, and I'd like you to join me as my guest." I stared at her, speechless. "The educational grant came with a personal stipend meant to recognize my work," she explained. "I can't think of a better use for it than making sure you finally get to take the Mediterranean cruise you and Richard dreamed about." "But that's the same cruise James is taking," I managed finally. "Exactly." Melissa's smile contained a hint of steel. "The same ship, the same itinerary, departing this Sunday." The implications slowly dawned on me. "James and Victoria don't know?" "Not yet." She leaned forward. "Elaine, I'm not suggesting this as some petty revenge scheme. This cruise means something to you, something sacred, connected to Richard's memory. You've waited 10 years for James to fulfill his promise. If he won't take you, I will. But won't it create terrible tension? Victoria already resents my relationship with the children. If we show up on the same cruise, perhaps, Melissa acknowledged. But consider this. Linda and Noah will be overjoyed to have both their grandmother and their mother on this trip. They've been dreading being trapped on a ship with Victoria for 7 days. That revelation stung. I hadn't realized my grandchildren were apprehensive about the vacation. Besides, Melissa continued, the Mediterranean Princess is enormous. It carries over 3,000 passengers. We'll have our own suite, our own dining arrangements, our own excursions. If Victoria wants to avoid us, she'll certainly have that option. I fingered the brochure, Richard's voice echoing in my memory. Promise me you'll see those blue domes in Santorini someday, Ellie. I don't know, Melissa. It seems so confrontational. Is it, though? She challenged gently. You have every right to book a cruise. The fact that it's the same one your son is taking, the one he promised to take you on for years, is simply an unfortunate coincidence. Her eyes twinkled. A very unfortunate, very specific coincidence. Despite myself, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. There was something undeniably appealing about the scenario she proposed, not out of vengefulness, but from a place of reclaiming what had been unjustly taken from me. The Neptune suite has 2 bedrooms, Melissa continued. It's the finest accommodation on the ship, with a private balcony, butler service, priority boarding, and exclusive access to certain ship amenities. You'd be traveling in significantly more luxury than James and Victoria. The thought of Victoria's face upon seeing us board the same cruise ship, in a superior accommodation no less, sent a small, guilty thrill through me. I couldn't possibly accept such an expensive gift, I protested weakly. It's not a gift, it's justice, Melissa replied simply. And perhaps a long overdue lesson for James about the consequences of breaking promises and allowing someone to come between him and his family. I studied the brochure again, tracing the ship's journey from Barcelona through the Mediterranean, Rome, Naples, Sicily, Santorini, Athens, all the places Richard and I had planned to see together. All the destinations I'd described to him during those final days in the hospital, his hand gripping mine as I painted verbal pictures of blue waters and ancient ruins. What about the children? I asked. Won't this put them in an awkward position? Actually, I've already spoken with them, Melissa admitted. Not about joining the cruise, that's still our secret, but about how they'd feel if, hypothetically, they saw us during their vacation. Linda literally jumped up and down at the idea. Noah said, and I quote, "That would be way better than just being with Dad and Victoria." My heart swelled at this evidence of my grandchildren's affection, even as I wrestled with the propriety of Melissa's proposition. Was this taking the high road? Certainly not. But after a decade of taking the high road, of patient understanding, of accepting cancellations and postponements, of watching my role in my son's life steadily diminish, perhaps the high road had led me nowhere worth going. If we do this, I said slowly, we need to be clear about our intentions. This isn't about revenge or creating drama. It's about me finally taking the trip I've dreamed of since Richard died, with someone who actually wants me there. Melissa nodded solemnly. Absolutely. We'll be dignified, gracious, and completely focused on enjoying our vacation. If James and Victoria choose to make it uncomfortable, that's their decision. I took a deep breath, scarcely believing what I was about to agree to. When do we leave? Melissa's smile broadened into a grin. Sunday morning. Priority boarding begins at 11 a.m. As we finished our lunch, discussing practical details and shore excursions, I felt something unfamiliar stirring within me. A sense of righteous defiance I hadn't experienced in decades. For too long, I'd accepted Victoria's subtle campaign to marginalize me in my son's life. For too long, I'd swallowed my hurt when James repeatedly broke his promise about the cruise. This time would be different. This time, I would board that ship with my head held high, escorted to the Neptune suite, while my son and his wife watched from the regular boarding line. And maybe, just maybe, James would finally recognize what he had allowed to happen, and who had been there for his children all along. Sunday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect day that seemed designed specifically for new beginnings. I stood in my bedroom, surveying the suitcases I'd packed and repacked multiple times over the past 5 days. Each item had been selected with care. Comfortable yet elegant outfits, appropriate for the fine dining and cultural excursions that awaited on the Mediterranean. These were the same clothes I'd chosen for the cruise with James. The cruise that was supposed to fulfill a decade-old promise. The cruise I'd been uninvited from with such casual cruelty. My phone chimed with a text from Melissa. "Car will pick you up in 30 minutes. Ready for our adventure?" Despite my nervousness, I smiled. Ready as I'll ever be. The doorbell rang precisely half an hour later. Instead of the taxi or rideshare I'd expected, a sleek black town car waited at my curb, a uniformed driver already moving to collect my luggage. "Mrs. Reynolds? I'm Michael, your driver from Elite Transportation," he explained, opening the rear door with a professional flourish. "Ms. Collins arranged for private transportation to the cruise terminal." Melissa was certainly ensuring we began this journey in style. As we drove toward the port, I gazed out the window, my mind replaying the events of the past week. I hadn't spoken to James since that devastating day in his kitchen. He'd called twice, leaving awkward voicemails that danced around his decision without actually apologizing. "I hope you understand, Mom, and we'll plan something special, just the two of us, when we get back." I hadn't returned the calls. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I'd chosen silence over accommodation. The port came into view, the massive Mediterranean princess dominating the horizon like a gleaming white mountain. Even from a distance, its size was breathtaking. 18 decks tall, nearly 1,000 feet long, a floating city designed for luxury and exploration. "There she is," Michael commented, noting my expression. "Magnificent, isn't she?" "Absolutely," I whispered, emotion suddenly tightening my throat. This was really happening. After 10 years of dreams deferred, I was about to board the Mediterranean cruise ship Richard and I had planned to take together in our retirement. The voyage cut short by cancer's cruel intervention. "I'm doing this for you too, Richard," I thought. "I'll see those blue domes in Santorini and remember us, just like I promised." The car pulled into the VIP drop-off area, where Melissa already waited, elegant in a crisp white pantsuit, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Beside her stood a cruise line representative holding an iPad and looking expectantly in our direction. "Elaine!" Melissa embraced me warmly. "Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" "I think so," I replied, suddenly conscious of my racing heart. "Mrs. Reynolds, Miss Collins, welcome to the Mediterranean Princess," the representative greeted us. "I'm Sophia, your personal concierge for Neptune Suite guests. We're delighted to have you joining us today." She led us past the main terminal entrance where hundreds of passengers waited in check-in lines, directly to a private lounge marked Priority Boarding. Inside, comfortable seating and a refreshment buffet awaited the ship's most premium guests. A pianist played softly in the corner, creating an atmosphere of refined tranquility. "Your suite is prepared and awaiting your arrival," Sophia informed us, efficiently checking our documentation. "As Neptune Suite guests, you'll be among the first to board, with exclusive access to the ship while regular boarding continues." As we completed the expedited check-in process, I couldn't help scanning the terminal visible through the lounge's glass walls. Somewhere among those crowds, James and his family would be waiting in the regular boarding lines. "Looking for them?" Melissa asked quietly. "I can't help it," I admitted. "Part of me dreads the confrontation, but another part wants to see Victoria's face when she realizes what's happening." Melissa finished with a slight smile. "I understand, but let's remember our agreement, dignity and grace above all. We're here to enjoy our cruise, not create drama." "Absolutely," I agreed, though I couldn't quite suppress the nervous fluttering in my stomach. "Mrs. Reynolds, Ms. Collins, we're ready to escort you aboard," Sophia announced, gesturing toward a separate boarding gangway where a small group of premium passengers was already gathering. As we rose to follow her, a familiar voice called out from just outside the lounge entrance. "Grandma?" I turned to see Noah, my 12-year-old grandson, staring at me through the glass partition, his mouth open in astonishment. Beside him, Linda's eyes widened in similar shock before her face broke into a delighted smile. Behind them, James and Victoria had just entered the terminal, struggling with their carry-on luggage while checking boarding documents. "Children, stay with us," Victoria called, not yet having seen what had captured the children's attention. Noah ignored her completely, darting toward the priority lounge entrance, despite the attendant's attempt to explain he couldn't enter without proper credentials. Linda followed, her 14-year-old dignity momentarily abandoned in her excitement. "Grandma! Mom!" Noah called out again, louder this time. "What are you doing here?" James's head snapped up at his son's exclamation. His eyes locked with mine through the glass partition, confusion rapidly giving way to comprehension. Beside him, Victoria froze mid-sentence, her expression shifting from irritation to stunned disbelief. "I believe we've been spotted," Melissa murmured, as Sophia moved to address the situation with the children. "It's all right," I told Sophia. "They're my grandchildren." The attendant nodded, allowing Noah and Linda to enter the lounge. They rushed toward us, Noah practically launching himself into my arms, while Linda embraced her mother before turning to hug me as well. "Are you coming on the cruise with us?" Linda asked, hope radiating from her face. "We are," Melissa confirmed, "though we'll be staying in a different part of the ship." "This is the best surprise ever," Noah exclaimed. "Wait till Dad sees." As if on cue, the lounge doors opened again, and James appeared, his expression a complicated mix of confusion and dawning realization. Victoria followed closely behind, her carefully composed features doing little to mask the cold anger in her eyes. "Mom? Melissa?" James managed, looking between us as if unable to process what he was seeing. "What's going on?" Sophia, sensing the sudden tension, intervened smoothly. "Mrs. Reynolds and Ms. Collins are our Neptune Suite guests for this voyage. Perhaps you know each other?" "They're my mother and my ex-wife," James explained, his voice strained. Victoria stepped forward, her smile tight and artificial. "What a surprising coincidence. You never mentioned you were planning to take this particular cruise." "Didn't I?" I replied pleasantly. "How forgetful of me." "We're in the Neptune Suite," Noah informed his father excitedly, oblivious to the undercurrents. "That's the biggest one on the whole ship." Victoria's smile flickered, her gaze darting to our priority boarding passes and back to Melissa's composed expression. "How fortunate. We're in a family ocean view stateroom." "Mrs. Reynolds, Ms. Collins," Sophia interjected diplomatically. "We're beginning priority boarding now, if you'd like to follow me." "Of course," Melissa replied, placing a gentle hand on Linda's shoulder. "We should let your father and Victoria continue with their check-in." "But we just found you," Noah protested. "Can't we stay together?" "You'll see us on board," I assured him, my heart warming at his eagerness to be with us. "The ship is big, but not that big." James still hadn't spoken, his expression suggesting he was mentally recalibrating everything he'd assumed about this vacation. Victoria, however, had recovered her composure, her eyes now cold and calculating. "We should finish checking in, children," she said with forced brightness. "I'm sure your grandmother and mother have their own plans for this cruise." "Indeed we do," Melissa confirmed pleasantly. "Though we'd love to see Linda and Noah whenever it works with your schedule." As Sophia led us toward the priority boarding gangway, I glanced back to see Victoria pulling James aside, speaking urgently into his ear with obvious agitation. The children stood apart, watching us with undisguised longing as we prepared to board ahead of them. Walking up the exclusive gangway minutes later, the Mediterranean breeze caressing my face, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also sadness that it had come to this, that my son had so easily discarded a promise that meant everything to me, that it had taken such dramatic action to claim what should have been freely given. "Are you all right?" Melissa asked quietly as we followed Sophia through the ship's exclusive upper deck entrance. "I'm not sure," I admitted. Seeing their faces, James looked so shocked. What did you expect? That he'd be delighted his mother and ex-wife had outsmarted his exclusionary plans? Of course not. It's just... I paused, searching for the right words. I've never deliberately gone against James's wishes before. It feels rebellious. Melissa smiled, linking her arm through mine as we entered the breathtaking atrium of the Mediterranean Princess. Then perhaps rebellion is exactly what you needed, Elaine. And from the looks on Linda and Noah's faces, I'd say it's precisely what they needed too. As champagne was offered to welcome us aboard, I realized Melissa was right. For too long, I'd accepted being sidelined in the name of keeping peace. Perhaps it was time, at 65 years old, to finally stand up for the dreams and relationships that mattered most to me. The real voyage, I suspected, had little to do with the Mediterranean and everything to do with reclaiming my place in my family's life. The Neptune Suite exceeded every expectation. Spanning over 1,000 square feet, it featured a spacious living room with panoramic windows, 2 elegant bedrooms, marble bathrooms with jetted tubs, and a private veranda large enough to host a small dinner party. Fresh flowers adorned every room, and a bottle of premium champagne chilled in an ice bucket, accompanied by a handwritten welcome note from the ship's captain. "This is incredible," I breathed, running my fingertips over the polished mahogany dining table. "Melissa, it's too much." "It's exactly right," she replied, examining the suite with satisfied approval. "After all these years of waiting for this trip, you deserve nothing less than the best." Our personal butler, Antonio, had just finished explaining the suite's amenities and our exclusive privileges: priority reservations at specialty restaurants, complimentary access to the ship's spa thermal suite, preferred seating at all entertainment venues, when my phone chimed with a text from Linda. "Grandma, we're on board. Can we come see your room?" Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Dad says we need to settle this situation first." Victoria looks like she swallowed a lemon. So awkward. Despite my anxiety about the inevitable confrontation, I couldn't help smiling at my granddaughter's candid assessment. "The children want to visit," I told Melissa, "but it seems James wants to settle the situation first." "I expected nothing less," she replied, kicking off her shoes and settling comfortably on the plush sofa. "Shall we prepare for the Inquisition?" As if on cue, a knock sounded at our door. Antonio, who had been arranging our dining reservations, moved to answer it. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster to see Mrs. Reynolds and Miss Collins," he announced with professional discretion, though I caught the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Clearly, family drama was not uncommon among cruise passengers. James entered first, his expression guarded. Victoria followed, her carefully composed features betrayed by the tightness around her mouth and the rigid set of her shoulders. Both of them faltered momentarily at the sight of our luxurious accommodations. "I'll return later to complete your reservations," Antonio murmured, discreetly exiting and closing the door behind him. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. I remained seated, suddenly grateful for Melissa's steady presence beside me. "Well," James finally said, his voice strained, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" Melissa replied mildly. "I would have thought you'd be pleased that your mother finally gets to take the Mediterranean cruise she's dreamed of for 10 years. Victoria stepped forward, her practiced smile failing to reach her eyes. "While this is certainly a surprising development, we're concerned about the confusion it creates for the children. We planned this as a family bonding experience." "Yes, I recall," I said, finding unexpected strength in my voice. "A family experience that deliberately excluded me." James had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mom, I explained why that decision was made. This cruise was meant to help solidify our blended family unit." "By excluding existing family members?" Melissa asked, her tone gentle but pointed. "That's an interesting approach to blending." Victoria's smile tightened further. "With all due respect, Melissa, our family arrangements aren't really your concern anymore." "Except they are," Melissa countered evenly. "Linda and Noah are my children too. And they were devastated to learn their grandmother, whom they adore, was being excluded from a trip she's talked about for years." "The children told you about that?" James asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Of course they did," Melissa replied. "They tell me everything." The implications of that simple statement hung in the air. What else had the children shared about life with Victoria? "Look," James said, clearly attempting to regain control of the conversation. "What's done is done. You're both here now, but this puts us in an awkward position." "I don't see why," I responded, surprising myself with my directness. "Melissa and I have our own accommodations, our own dining arrangements, and our own excursion plans. We're not asking to intrude on your family time." "But the children will naturally want to spend time with you," Victoria objected, the first cracks appearing in her composed facade. "It disrupts everything we planned." "Perhaps you should have considered that before excluding their grandmother from a trip that's been promised to her for a decade," Melissa suggested, her voice remaining remarkably calm. James ran a hand through his hair, that familiar nervous gesture I'd seen since his childhood. "This isn't productive. We need to figure out how to handle this situation for the next 7 days." "I agree," I said, standing to pour myself a glass of water from the crystal carafe on the dining table. "I suggest we let the children decide how they want to divide their time. They're old enough to have a say in who they spend time with." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "They're children," They need structure and consistent boundaries. They're 14 and 12, Melissa corrected, perfectly capable of expressing their preferences without causing a diplomatic incident. The tension in the room thickened. I could almost see Victoria's mind working, calculating how to maintain control of a situation rapidly slipping from her grasp. Perhaps, James suggested hesitantly, we could coordinate certain activities together, some meals or shore excursions. That way the children don't feel torn. Victoria shot him a look of barely concealed betrayal. That seems reasonable, I agreed, deliberately ignoring Victoria's reaction. Though, of course, Melissa and I have our own plans for much of the cruise. Yes, Melissa added. We've booked several special experiences. I'm sure the children would enjoy joining us for some of them, if you're agreeable. Before James could respond, Victoria interjected sharply. We've already paid for family excursions, premium packages that were quite expensive. I'm sure the ship can accommodate changes, I replied mildly, or refunds if necessary. Victoria's composure finally cracked. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? To disrupt our family vacation? To make it impossible for us to establish any boundaries? To ensure the children are constantly pulled between different groups? Victoria, James cautioned, clearly uncomfortable with her outburst. No, James. This was deliberate. They planned this together to undermine us. Your mother couldn't accept not being the center of attention for once, and your ex-wife saw an opportunity to cause problems. The accusation hung in the air, so blatantly unfair that it momentarily robbed me of speech. Melissa, however, remained unruffled. Actually, she said quietly, we planned this because Elaine has waited 10 years for a promise to be fulfilled. A promise James made at his father's deathbed. A promise that was broken not for any legitimate reason, but because you felt threatened by the children's love for their grandmother. James paled at the mention of Richard's deathbed. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked, finding my voice again. You promised your father you would take me on this cruise. You promised me year after year. Then suddenly, 1 week before departure, I'm uninvited because your wife doesn't want me to distract from her family bonding experience. Victoria turned to James, her expression a mixture of anger and calculated vulnerability. Are you going to let them speak to me this way? On our family vacation? I watched my son, seeing him teeter on the familiar precipice of choosing the path of least resistance, of appeasing the most immediate source of pressure. To my surprise, he hesitated. They have a point, Victoria, he said slowly. I did promise Mom this cruise, for years. Victoria stared at him, clearly shocked by this unexpected deviation from his usual pattern. You can't be serious. We discussed this. We agreed. You decided, he corrected gently. I went along with it to avoid conflict, but seeing Mom here, knowing how much this trip meant to her and Dad, he trailed off, a flash of shame crossing his features. The door chimed again, saving us from the awkwardness of the moment. Antonio entered, his professional demeanor intact despite the obvious tension in the room. Pardon the interruption, but your grandchildren are outside, quite insistent on seeing you, he informed me with a slight bow. James sighed. Let them in, please. Noah burst into the suite like a whirlwind, his excitement palpable. This place is amazing. Is that a hot tub on your balcony? Do you have a butler? Can we hang out here? Linda followed more sedately, though her eyes widened as she took in the suite's opulence. Wow, she breathed. This is like 10 times better than our room. Victoria winced visibly at the comparison. Children, James began, his tone cautioning. We were just discussing some important matters with your grandmother and mother. About how we get to split our time? Noah asked eagerly. Because I want to do the Pompeii excursion with Grandma. She knows everything about volcanoes. And I want to go shopping in Santorini with Mom, Linda added. She promised to help me find those blue and white ceramics for my collection. The simplicity of their desires, to spend time with people they loved, doing things that interested them, highlighted the absurdity of the adults' tension. We'll work something out, James assured them, shooting a meaningful glance at Victoria. But right now, we should let your grandmother and mother get settled. The mandatory safety drill starts in 30 minutes. Can we come back after? Noah pressed. We'll see, Victoria answered, before anyone else could respond. We have dinner reservations at the main dining room tonight. Actually, Melissa interjected smoothly, Neptune Suite guests have a table permanently reserved at Bella Luna, the ship's premier restaurant. We'd be delighted to have Linda and Noah join us tonight if they'd like. Both children's faces lit up at the invitation. Victoria's expression, by contrast, darkened considerably. "That's very kind," James replied, carefully neutral. "But we should probably stick together for the first night at least, get our bearings on the ship." I recognized the compromise for what it was, an attempt to placate Victoria while not completely dismissing our presence. Typical James, always trying to navigate the path of least resistance. "Of course," I agreed, though disappointment flickered across the children's faces. "There's plenty of time, 7 whole days." As they prepared to leave, Noah impulsively darted back to hug me. "I'm so glad you're here, Grandma," he whispered. "This is going to be the best cruise ever now." His simple, genuine affection brought tears to my eyes. This love, this connection, was what Victoria had tried to exclude from the vacation. This was what truly mattered, far more than luxury suites or premium excursions. After they departed, Melissa and I exchanged glances. "Well," she said with a slight smile, "that went about as expected." "James surprised me a bit," I admitted, standing up to Victoria, even slightly. "Perhaps seeing you here, physically present rather than a concept easily dismissed, made the reality of what he'd done more difficult to ignore." Melissa crossed to the balcony doors, sliding them open to admit the fresh sea breeze. "The question is, what happens next?" As the Mediterranean princess's departure horn sounded, signaling the beginning of our journey, I couldn't help wondering the same thing. Our first evening aboard the Mediterranean Princess unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance and strategic encounters. The mandatory safety drill placed us on opposite sides of the ship from James's family, and our dinner at Bella Luna, the ship's premier restaurant reserved exclusively for suite guests, offered a welcome respite from the tension of our earlier confrontation. "To new adventures," Melissa toasted, raising her glass of champagne as Barcelona's coastline receded in the distance. "And to finally fulfilling promises, even if we had to take matters into our own hands." I clinked my glass against hers, still processing the extraordinary turn of events that had brought me here. "I still can't believe we're doing this." "Having second thoughts?" she asked, studying my expression carefully. "Not exactly," I replied, considering my feelings. "More like adjusting to this new version of myself. I've spent my entire life avoiding conflict, accommodating others, putting everyone else's needs first, and now here I am, deliberately creating a situation James and Victoria wanted to avoid. There's a difference between avoiding conflict and allowing yourself to be mistreated," Melissa pointed out gently. "You've waited 10 years for this trip, Elaine. 10 years of James promising and postponing. You had every right to take it for yourself." The waiter arrived with our appetizers, delicate seafood creations artfully presented on china, so fine it was nearly translucent. As we savored the exquisite food, our conversation drifted to lighter topics: the shore excursions we'd booked, the evening entertainment options, the ship's impressive amenities. Later, strolling along the promenade deck under a canopy of stars, we encountered Linda and Noah at the gelato bar, accompanied by a visibly uncomfortable James. Victoria was notably absent. "Grandma! Mom!" Noah called out, waving enthusiastically. "You have to try the pistachio gelato." "It's amazing," James offered a strained smile. "Evening, Mom." "Melissa, enjoying your first night aboard?" "Very much," I replied, noting the tightness around his eyes. "The Neptune suite is truly spectacular." "So we gathered from the kids' detailed descriptions," he said with a forced chuckle. "They've talked of little else since seeing it." "Where's Victoria?" Melissa asked casually, accepting a sample of gelato from the server. A shadow crossed James's face. She wasn't feeling well. "The motion of the ship, possibly." Linda caught my eye, giving a slight eye roll that suggested Victoria's seasickness might have more to do with the situation than actual nausea. My granddaughter had always been perceptive. "Dad said we can have breakfast with you tomorrow," Noah announced, chocolate gelato ringing his mouth. "Is that okay? Can we come to your fancy suite?" "Neptune suite guests typically take breakfast in Bella Luna, or through room service," I explained. "But you're absolutely welcome to join us. We'd love that." James shifted uncomfortably. "I was thinking more along the lines of meeting at the Ocean View Cafe. It's more casual." The implication was clear. He didn't want the children experiencing more of the luxury they were already comparing favorably to their own accommodations. "The Ocean View works perfectly," Melissa agreed smoothly, sparing James further discomfort. 8 o'clock? As we confirmed plans and bid goodnight, Linda hung back briefly while James helped Noah clean his gelato-smeared face. "Victoria isn't seasick," she whispered. "She was crying and yelling at Dad in their room. I heard her say you two planned this whole thing to embarrass her." Before I could respond, James called for Linda to join them. She squeezed my hand quickly before hurrying after her father and brother. "Well," Melissa said as we continued our evening stroll, "it appears Victoria isn't taking our presence well." "I never intended to cause actual distress," I admitted, troubled by Linda's revelation. "Just to finally take the trip I've been promised for so long." Melissa's expression softened. "You have every right to be here, Elaine. Victoria's reaction isn't about legitimate hurt, it's about control. She tried to exclude you, and she's upset that her plan failed." Despite her reassurance, I slept fitfully that night, troubled by competing emotions. Satisfaction at finally experiencing the cruise I'd dreamed of for so long, discomfort at the family tension, and nagging concern about what Victoria might do next. The first full day at sea dawned gloriously bright, the Mediterranean stretching like blue silk to the horizon. Breakfast with the children proved delightful, their excitement about the day's activities infectious. James maintained a polite, if somewhat reserved, demeanor, while Victoria had once again declined to join us, citing a spa appointment. "We're going to the main pool after breakfast," Noah informed us between bites of pancake. "They have this awesome water slide that goes out over the edge of the ship." "Sounds terrifying," I laughed, enjoying his enthusiasm. "You should come," he insisted. "Both of you!" James cleared his throat. "Actually, I thought we'd try the family pool instead. It might be less crowded." "But Dad," Linda protested, "we specifically talked about the main pool with the cool slide." "Plans change, honey," James replied, avoiding eye contact with Melissa and me. "The family pool has great activities too." The reason for this sudden change became clear moments later when Victoria appeared, approaching our table with determined steps. She'd clearly made an effort with her appearance: designer sundress, perfect makeup, hair styled in elegant waves, perhaps in response to Linda's comments about Melissa's natural beauty the previous evening. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her smile tight but in place. "James, I thought you were bringing the children to meet me at the spa cafe. We got a bit caught up here," he explained, rising to pull out a chair for her. "How was your treatment?" "Refreshing," Victoria replied, pointedly ignoring the empty chair and remaining standing. "But we should really get going if we want good spots at the family pool." "We were planning on the main pool," Noah said, confusion evident in his voice. "You know, the one with the cool slide?" Victoria's smile didn't waver. "The family pool is more appropriate. Besides, I've arranged a special surprise there." The children's faces fell, but neither argued further, a reaction that struck me as telling. How often were their preferences overridden by Victoria's better plans? "Perhaps we could all meet for lunch?" I suggested, trying to salvage something positive from the increasingly awkward interaction. "We have reservations at the sushi restaurant," Victoria replied quickly. "Very limited seating. Another time, perhaps." As they prepared to leave, I noticed Linda whispering something to Melissa, who nodded subtly in response. Noah gave me a quick hug, his disappointment at the pool change evident in his subdued manner. "What was that about?" I asked Melissa after they'd departed. "Linda asked if we could meet them at the arcade at 3 o'clock, she explained. "Apparently, Victoria hates arcade games and never stays more than a few minutes." The pattern was becoming increasingly clear. Victoria was systematically steering the children away from us, changing previously agreed plans, creating special surprises to compete with the natural draw of spending time with their grandmother and mother. We spent the morning enjoying Neptune Suite privileges, a private tour of the bridge conducted by the first officer, followed by a wine-tasting event exclusive to premium guests. Despite the luxury surrounding us, I found my thoughts repeatedly returning to the children and the subtle manipulation I'd witnessed at breakfast. Just before 3 o'clock, we made our way to the ship's arcade, finding Linda and Noah already engrossed in a virtual racing game. James sat nearby, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone enduring rather than enjoying the activity. "Where's Victoria?" Melissa asked casually as we approached. "Spa," Linda answered, without looking away from her game. "She said arcade games are too noisy and juvenile." James looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to resignation upon seeing us. "The kids mentioned you might stop by. We thought we'd treat them to some games," I explained, noting how Noah's face lit up at my arrival. "Grandma, You have to try this racing game with me, he insisted, already pulling me toward an adjacent machine. For the next hour, the tension of the morning melted away as we immersed ourselves in the simple joy of play. Linda challenged Melissa to a dance competition on an electronic platform, while Noah taught me the finer points of virtual race car driving, though I remained hopelessly inept. Even James eventually put away his phone, joining Noah in a basketball shooting game that brought out his competitive side. It was during this rare moment of unguarded happiness that Victoria found us. She stood at the arcade entrance, observing our interaction with an expression that shifted rapidly from surprise to calculation to barely concealed anger. "There you are," she called, her voice cutting through the arcade's electronic symphony. "James, did you forget our couple's massage at 4? We're going to be late." James checked his watch, frowning slightly. "I don't remember scheduling a couple's massage." "It was meant to be a surprise," Victoria replied, her tone conveying that this was information he should have somehow intuited. "I booked it weeks ago as a special treat." The improvised nature of this special treat was transparent, at least to Melissa and me, but James dutifully prepared to leave. "What about us?" Noah asked. "Can we stay here with Grandma and Mom?" Victoria's smile tightened. "Absolutely not. We have that special activity at the teen club I told you about, remember?" "You didn't tell us about any special activity," Linda muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. "Linda," James cautioned quietly, "let's not create a scene." The reprimand struck me as particularly unfair. Linda had simply stated a fact, while Victoria was clearly fabricating excuses to separate the children from us. "Actually," Melissa interjected smoothly, "as part of our Neptune Suite package, we've been invited to a private ice cream party on the helipad at sunset. Linda and Noah would be welcome to join us if they'd like. That way you two can enjoy your couple's massage without worrying about the children." The mention of another exclusive event available to us, but not to Victoria, visibly rankled her. "That's not necessary. The teen club has plenty of activities." "But we want to go to the ice cream party," Noah protested. "Please, Dad. It's on the helipad. How cool is that?" James looked torn, his gaze shifting between his wife's increasingly rigid posture and his son's pleading expression. "Let the children decide," I suggested quietly. "They're old enough to know what they'd enjoy more. They're not old enough to be wandering the ship without adult supervision," Victoria countered sharply. "They wouldn't be," Melissa pointed out. "They'd be with their mother and grandmother." The standoff continued for several uncomfortable moments before James finally sighed. "If the kids want to go to the ice cream party, I don't see the harm. We can meet up afterward for dinner." Victoria's face flushed with barely suppressed fury. "Fine," she snapped, turning abruptly and walking away. "Come on, James. We're already late." As James hurried after his wife, Linda and Noah exchanged meaningful glances. "She's going to be so mad at Dad later," Linda murmured. "Why is she like this?" Noah asked, genuine confusion in his young face. "Why doesn't she want us to have fun with Grandma and Mom?" The innocent question hung in the air, both heartbreaking and revealing. The children weren't oblivious to Victoria's machinations. They were acutely aware of them, even if they didn't fully understand the motivations behind them. "Some people," Melissa began carefully, "find it difficult to share attention and affection. They see relationships as competitive rather than complementary." "Like a zero-sum game," Linda suggested, demonstrating her academic vocabulary. "If we love you guys, she thinks it means we love her less." "That's actually a very insightful way to put it," I acknowledged, impressed by my granddaughter's perception. As we headed toward the helipad for our exclusive ice cream celebration, I reflected on Linda's simple but profound observation. Victoria did indeed seem to view family relationships as a competition, one she was increasingly desperate to win, regardless of the cost to the children's happiness or James's peace of mind. The question was, how long could such a destructive approach continue before something broke beyond repair? Our third day aboard the Mediterranean Princess brought our first port of call, Rome, or more precisely, Civitavecchia, the coastal port city serving as gateway to the Eternal City. The morning dawned clear and warm, promising perfect weather for exploring the ancient capital. Melissa and I had booked an exclusive shore excursion through our Neptune Suite privileges, a private guided tour of the Vatican museums before regular opening hours, followed by priority access to the Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's Basilica. When we'd mentioned it to the children during the previous evening's ice cream party, their enthusiasm had been palpable. "That sounds amazing," Linda had gushed. "We're just doing the regular Rome Highlights tour with Dad and Victoria." "Yeah, with like 50 other people," Noah had added with the characteristic disdain of a 12-year-old for anything mass market. They said the Vatican was too crowded to bother with. Now, as Melissa and I enjoyed our room service breakfast on our private veranda, my phone chimed with a text from James. "Kids are begging to join your Vatican tour. Is that still possible?" Melissa smiled when I showed her the message. "Victory by superior excursion planning. Should we rescue them from the Highlights bus tour?" "Absolutely," I replied, already texting back. "We'd love to have them. Our private guide can accommodate 4. Meet at 8:15 at the Priority Disembarkation Lounge." His response came quickly. "Thank you. I'll drop them off. Victoria still wants to do the Highlights tour." I couldn't help feeling a small surge of satisfaction. The children had clearly expressed their preference, and for once, James was allowing them to follow it rather than forcing them to conform to Victoria's plans. At 8:15 precisely, Linda and Noah burst into the Priority Lounge, both dressed in neat attire appropriate for Vatican visits. James followed, looking somewhat harried, his expression suggesting he'd endured significant conflict over this arrangement. "Thank you for including them," he said quietly, as the children excitedly examined the refreshment table reserved for premium passengers. "Victoria isn't pleased, but the kids were so set on this. We're happy to have them," I assured him. "The private tour will be much more meaningful than trying to glimpse the Sistine Chapel in a crowd of thousands." James nodded, his gaze lingering on his children's animated faces. "They've been different on this cruise, more like their old selves." He hesitated, then added, "I think Victoria and I need to have some serious conversations when we get home." Before I could respond, our tour group was called for priority disembarkation. James hugged his children goodbye, promising to meet us back at the ship in the late afternoon. The day proved magical beyond expectations. Our private guide, Sophia, was a doctoral student in art history who brought the Vatican's treasures to life with stories and insights rarely shared with standard tour groups. The children were captivated, particularly Linda, who bombarded Sophia with thoughtful questions about Renaissance art techniques and symbolic imagery. Most spectacular was our early access to the Sistine Chapel. Instead of shuffling through with hundreds of other tourists, we entered the sacred space with just our small group, allowing us to sit in reverent silence on the benches lining the walls, gazing upward at Michelangelo's masterpiece as Sophia quietly explained the biblical narratives depicted. "It's like he painted with light," Linda whispered, awestruck. "Grandpa would have loved this," Noah said suddenly, his young face solemn. "Dad always says Grandpa was super into art and history." "He was," I confirmed, emotion tightening my throat at this unexpected mention of Richard. This Vatican visit was one of the experiences he most looked forward to when we planned our retirement travels. "Is that why you wanted to come on this cruise so badly?" Linda asked perceptively. "Because of promises to Grandpa?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "Your grandfather and I had so many plans for traveling after he retired. When he got sick, those plans had to be set aside. But we would talk about this trip even during his hospital stays. He made me promise I'd see the Mediterranean someday, especially Santorini. And Dad promised to take you," Noah said, connecting the dots. After Grandpa died, the simple statement, delivered with a child's straightforward clarity, hung in the chapel's hushed atmosphere. Both children looked at me with new understanding in their eyes. "Yes," I said simply. "He did." The remainder of our Vatican tour continued with a lighter mood, though I noticed both children staying particularly close to me, as if their new awareness of the trip's emotional significance had strengthened their protective instincts. After completing our Vatican visit, we enjoyed a leisurely lunch at a charming trattoria Sophia recommended, followed by a stroll through the picturesque streets of Trastevere. The day passed in a bubble of genuine connection and joy, untainted by the tensions that had characterized our first days aboard the ship. Reality intruded only when we returned to the port, finding James waiting at the disembarkation point, alone and with a troubled expression. "How is the Vatican?" he asked, embracing the children as they bubbled over with excited descriptions of all they'd seen and learned. "It was incredible," Linda enthused. "We got to sit in the Sistine Chapel, with hardly anyone else there. Sophia, our guide, knew everything about every painting. Way better than being stuck on a bus with 50 strangers, Noah added with characteristic bluntness. James winced slightly at the comparison. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The highlights tour was fine. Where's Victoria? Melissa asked, noting his wife's absence. She decided to do some shopping before returning to the ship, James replied, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. She'll be back before departure. As we boarded, I noticed James's unusual quietness. While the children continued recounting their Vatican adventures to Melissa, I fell into step beside my son. Is everything all right? I asked quietly. He hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. Not really. Victoria and I had a significant disagreement during the tour. About the kids, about this trip, about a lot of things. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it despite my complicated feelings about Victoria. James shook his head. Don't be. Some things needed to be said. He glanced ahead at his children, their animated faces as they described the Raphael rooms to Melissa. Seeing them like this, engaged, excited, intellectually curious, reminds me of how they used to be all the time. Before, he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Before Victoria. Before the systematic campaign to restructure their family life in her preferred image. Before the gradual dampening of their natural enthusiasm and interests to accommodate her preferences. They're wonderful children, I said. You and Melissa raised them well. The mention of his ex-wife's name didn't trigger the defensive reaction it might have days earlier. Instead, James nodded thoughtfully. She's a good mother. I haven't always acknowledged that adequately. We parted ways in the ship's grand atrium, the children reluctant to leave but recognizing their father's need for their company. As they walked away, Linda turned back to mouth a silent "thank you" that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Successful day, Melissa commented as we headed toward our suite. The children had a meaningful cultural experience, and it seems James might be having some realizations of his own. Did you notice how he mentioned you as a good mother? I asked. That's not something he would have said a week ago. People can change their perspectives when presented with clear contrasts, she replied thoughtfully. Victoria's behavior on this cruise hasn't exactly been subtle. Indeed, Victoria's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative and monopolize the children's time had apparently reached a breaking point during the Rome Highlights tour. Though James hadn't shared details, his demeanor suggested a significant shift in his assessment of the situation. That evening, the ship's entertainment included a Broadway-style show in the main theater. Melissa and I, enjoying our priority seating in the center section, were surprised when Linda and Noah appeared beside us just before the performance began. Dad said we could sit with you, Linda explained, slipping into the empty seat beside me. They're a few rows back. I glanced over my shoulder, spotting James and Victoria several rows behind us. While James offered a small wave, Victoria stared straight ahead, her profile rigid with obvious displeasure. Another battle lost, Melissa murmured, noting the same tableau. Throughout the performance, I was acutely aware of the children's happiness at being with us, their spontaneous reactions to the show, their whispered comments and questions. Equally, I felt Victoria's gaze boring into the back of my head, her resentment almost palpable across the intervening rows. As the final curtain fell and the audience erupted in applause, Noah turned to me with shining eyes. "This is the best vacation ever, Grandma." "I'm glad you're enjoying it, sweetheart," I replied, warmed by his enthusiasm. "No, I mean it," he insisted, with the earnestness only a 12-year-old can muster. "If you and Mom weren't here, it would have been awful. Victoria had this whole schedule planned out with, no fun stuff at all, just boring adult things she wanted to do." "Noah," Linda cautioned, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Well, it's true," he defended. "Remember the color-coded itinerary she made? 2 hours for shopping in every port, those fancy restaurants where kids aren't really welcome, all those art galleries she wanted to see but wouldn't let us go to the Vatican." "Noah, that's enough," James's voice interrupted as he approached our row, Victoria conspicuously absent. "It's time to head back to our stateroom." Noah's face fell at his father's stern tone, but I noticed James didn't actually contradict his son's assessment. Instead, he simply placed a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. "Did you enjoy the show, Dad?" Linda asked, clearly attempting to diffuse the tension. "Very much," he replied, his expression softening, "though I think I missed about half of it." The unspoken reason hung in the air. Victoria had likely spent the performance voicing her displeasure rather than watching the entertainment. As the children reluctantly said their goodbyes, promising to see us at breakfast, James lingered briefly. "Thank you again for today," he said quietly. "They haven't stopped talking about the Vatican tour." "It was our pleasure," I assured him. "They're wonderful companions." He nodded, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. "Mom, He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "I'm starting to understand some things. About promises kept and broken. About priorities." Before I could respond, he squeezed my hand briefly and followed his children up the aisle. "Well," Melissa said as we made our way out of the theater, "that was interesting." "Which part?" I asked, my mind still processing James's cryptic comment. "All of it," she replied, "but particularly the way Noah blurted out Victoria's original plans for the cruise. Did you notice James didn't contradict him? Didn't defend Victoria's itinerary?" I hadn't missed that significant omission. "Do you think they're having serious problems?" Melissa considered this as we strolled along the moonlit promenade deck. "I think James is seeing Victoria through new eyes on this trip, seeing how she interacts with the children, how she prioritizes her preferences over theirs, how she reacts when she doesn't get her way, and comparing it to how you interact with them," I added, recognizing the contrast that had been clearly displayed throughout our Rome excursion. She shrugged modestly, though I caught the hint of a satisfied smile. "I just treat them like the intelligent, curious people they are, not accessories to be managed or obstacles to be worked around." As we reached our suite, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically the cruise's dynamics had shifted in just 3 days. What had begun as my simple desire to finally experience the Mediterranean voyage I'd been promised had unexpectedly catalyzed a deeper reevaluation of family patterns and relationships, and we still had 4 days to go, including Santorini, the destination Richard had most wanted us to see together. Our 4th day aboard the Mediterranean Princess was designated as a sea day. No ports of call, just the endless blue expanse of ocean as we cruised toward our next destination, Sicily. After the excitement of Rome, the leisurely pace felt welcome, offering opportunities to explore the ship's many amenities and entertainment options. Melissa and I began our morning with a private yoga session on the helipad, an exclusive activity available only to premium suite guests. The experience of practicing gentle stretches against the backdrop of sea and sky proved both calming and invigorating, a perfect start to what would become a decidedly tumultuous day. "The children want to join us for the cooking class this afternoon," Melissa mentioned as we enjoyed post-yoga smoothies at the ship's health bar. James texted to ask if that would be all right. "Of course," I replied, pleased at this further evidence that James was allowing the children to spend time with us despite Victoria's obvious displeasure. "I'm surprised he's asking, rather than just telling them no." "I think the balance of power is shifting," Melissa observed, her perception as acute as ever. "Victoria's been pushing so hard to control everyone's experience that she's actually undermining her own position." The cooking class, scheduled for 2 p.m. in the ship's culinary center, was another Neptune Suite privilege, a small group session with the vessel's executive chef, learning to prepare Mediterranean specialties using fresh ingredients sourced from our port stops. When Linda and Noah joined us, both were bubbling with excitement. "Dad said we can have dinner with you tonight too," Noah announced as he donned his child-sized chef's apron. "At that fancy restaurant you go to." "Bella Luna?" I clarified, surprised at this unexpected development. "Both of you and your father?" "And Victoria," Linda added, though her tone suggested this inclusion was obligatory rather than enthusiastic. "Dad said it was time we all had dinner together like civilized people." Melissa and I exchanged significant glances. A family dinner at Bella Luna represented a substantial shift from the carefully separate schedules Victoria had been maintaining. Even more telling was James's apparent insistence on the arrangement, overriding what I suspected was considerable opposition from his wife. The cooking class proved delightful, the children displaying unexpected aptitude as we learned to prepare authentic pasta carbonara and tiramisu. The executive chef, charmed by Noah's earnest questions and Linda's meticulous attention to technique, invited them to return for the next day's session as his special guests. "That was so fun," Noah declared as we exited, proudly carrying containers of our culinary creations. "Victoria never lets us cook at home. She says kids make too much mess in the kitchen, which is exactly the point of cooking with children, Melissa replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. The mess is part of the learning process. She doesn't like learning processes, Linda muttered, just perfect results. The candid assessment, delivered with a teenager's matter-of-fact bluntness, revealed volumes about daily life in James and Victoria's household. I found myself increasingly troubled by these glimpses into the restrictive environment my grandchildren navigated when not with their mother or me. We parted ways to prepare for dinner, the children promising to meet us at Bella Luna promptly at 7. As Melissa and I dressed in our suite, selecting appropriate attire for the ship's premier dining venue, I found myself uncharacteristically anxious about the upcoming meal. It's going to be fine, Melissa assured me, noting my repeated adjustments to my outfit and jewelry. We're civilized adults capable of sharing a meal without incident. Victoria isn't just any adult, I reminded her. And this dinner wasn't her idea. Melissa considered this as she applied a touch of lipstick. True. Which means she's either planning to make it unbearable for everyone, or she's finally recognizing she needs to adapt her approach. Either way, we'll handle it with grace. Bella Luna Restaurant occupied the ship's most coveted real estate, the forward section of the top deck surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic ocean views. As Neptune Suite guests, Melissa and I had been assigned one of the best tables, positioned to maximize the spectacular sunset vistas while ensuring privacy and comfort. We arrived first, escorted to our table by Alessandro, the maitre d' who had been attending to us each evening. He'd just finished explaining the evening's special tasting menu when Linda and Noah appeared, followed by James and a visibly tense Victoria. "Good evening," Alessandro greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Reynolds guests, welcome to Bella Luna. We've prepared our finest table for your family this evening." Victoria's expression tightened at the reminder that her presence was due to our established status as regular patrons rather than any standing of her own. Nevertheless, she managed a rigid smile as we all took our seats, the children strategically positioned between the adults as buffers. "This place is amazing," Noah declared, wide-eyed at the elegant surroundings. "Look at those chandeliers. The entire ship is quite impressive," Victoria commented, her first neutral contribution of the evening. "Though I imagine you've seen it all by now from your advantageous accommodations." "We've certainly enjoyed exploring," I replied, determined to maintain a pleasant atmosphere, though there's always something new to discover on a vessel this size. James, perhaps sensing the potential for tension, quickly directed the conversation toward our Rome experiences, encouraging the children to share highlights from our Vatican tour. Their enthusiasm proved infectious, momentarily easing the undercurrent of strain as we ordered appetizers and entrees from Bella Luna's sophisticated menu. The temporary peace shattered when Linda innocently mentioned our upcoming plans for Santorini. "Mom arranged for us to have a private tour with a local photographer," she explained excitedly. "He's going to show us all the best spots for pictures and teach us about composition and lighting. Plus, we get to keep a professional photo album as a souvenir." Victoria set down her water glass with deliberate precision. "I wasn't aware you had plans for Santorini already arranged," she said, addressing the children rather than Melissa or me. "Your father and I have booked a family excursion to the archaeological site at Akrotiri." The children exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We told Dad we wanted to do the photography tour," Noah said quietly. "He said it was okay." All eyes turned to James, who shifted uncomfortably under the collective scrutiny. "I thought we'd discuss this," he said to Victoria. The kids expressed a preference for the photography experience. "You and I can still do the archaeological tour if you'd like." Victoria's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "So I'm to tour ancient ruins alone with my husband, while his children enjoy a special excursion with his ex-wife and mother. How exactly is that the family vacation we planned?" "Victoria," James began, a warning note in his voice. "No, James. I've accommodated enough," she continued, her voice rising slightly despite the restaurant's refined atmosphere. "I've watched the children abandon our carefully planned activities day after day. I've endured their constant comparisons between our standard stateroom and the luxury suite these two are flaunting. I've tolerated their blatant preference for time spent with their grandmother and biological mother over me. But I will not stand by while our Santorini excursion, the highlight of this cruise, is similarly hijacked." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Alessandro, sensing tension, approached with professional concern. "Is everything satisfactory with your appetizers?" "Everything's delicious," James assured him quickly. "Thank you." After the maitre d' retreated, James turned to Victoria with barely contained frustration. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion." "When is the time, James?" she demanded, though she lowered her voice to an intense whisper. "When we're back in our cramped stateroom where the children can hear every word through those paper-thin walls? When we're home and the damage is already done? This entire cruise has been systematically undermined from the moment we boarded." Linda and Noah stared at their plates. The excited animation that had characterized them moments earlier completely evaporated. My heart ached for them. Innocent children forced to navigate adult tensions not of their making. "Perhaps," I suggested gently, "we should focus on enjoying this lovely meal together. The children shouldn't have to witness." "With all due respect, Elaine," Victoria interrupted, her tone conveying anything but respect. "You lost the right to offer family advice when you and Melissa deliberately orchestrated this entire situation. Don't pretend this isn't exactly what you wanted, to create conflict between James and me, to establish yourselves as the preferred caretakers, to undermine my position in this family." "That's not fair, Victoria," Melissa said quietly. "Neither Elaine nor I have tried to create conflict. We simply wanted to experience this cruise. Elaine because it's been her dream for 10 years, and me because I wanted to give my children memorable experiences during our vacation time together." 10 years, Victoria repeated sarcastically. "Yes, we've all heard repeatedly about the precious promise James made a decade ago, the sacred vow that apparently trumps all other family considerations. It was a promise made at my husband's deathbed," I said, an unusual edge entering my voice. "A promise James repeated yearly until you decided I was inconvenient to your family narrative." The entrees arrived, creating a momentary pause in the increasingly heated exchange. Alessandro, now clearly aware of the tension at our table, served with efficient discretion before withdrawing. Noah, his young face troubled, looked between the adults uncertainly. "Can we just not fight, please? This was supposed to be a nice dinner." His plea, delivered with such genuine distress, momentarily silenced us all. James reached over to squeeze his son's shoulder reassuringly. "You're right, buddy. We can discuss differences of opinion without ruining dinner." He turned to Victoria with an expression that combined affection and firmness. "The children have expressed their preference for the photography tour. I think we should honor that." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, as she realized he would not yield on this point. Without another word, she placed her napkin beside her barely touched entree and stood. "Enjoy your dinner," she said coldly. "I find I've lost my appetite." As she walked away, her rigid posture betraying the depth of her anger, an uncomfortable silence descended on our table. The damage Victoria had sought to prevent by controlling the cruise experience had ironically been caused by her very attempts at control. "I'm sorry," James said finally, addressing all of us but looking particularly at his children. "That wasn't fair to any of you." "Is she going to be okay?" Noah asked, his innate compassion evident despite the tension Victoria had created. "She'll be fine," James assured him. "She just needs some time to cool down." Linda, more perceptive than her younger brother, studied her father's face carefully. "This isn't just about Santorini or this cruise, is it, Dad?" James met his daughter's gaze, his expression a complex mixture of sadness and resolution. "No, honey. It's about a lot of things that have been building for a while. As we attempted to salvage what remained of our dinner, I couldn't help wondering if we were witnessing not just a vacation disagreement, but the beginning of a more fundamental unraveling of James and Victoria's marriage. And if so, what responsibility did Melissa and I bear for catalyzing that process through our unexpected presence on this cruise? The morning after Victoria's dramatic exit from Bella Luna found Melissa and me enjoying coffee on our private veranda as the Mediterranean princess approached the Sicilian coast. The rising sun illuminated distant Mount Etna, its imposing silhouette a dramatic backdrop to the approaching shoreline. "Any word from James?" Melissa asked, nodding toward my phone resting on the table between us. "Nothing since his text last night," I replied. After returning to our suite following the disastrous dinner, I'd received a brief message. "Kids are fine. Victoria and I have much to discuss. Thank you for handling a difficult situation with grace. Do you think Victoria will join the children for today's excursion? Melissa wondered, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. We'd booked a private tour of Taormina, the picturesque cliffside town overlooking Sicily's eastern coast. James had arranged for the children to join us, though after last night's confrontation, I wondered if those plans might change. I honestly don't know, I admitted. Part of me hopes she stays behind to avoid further tension, but another part recognizes that excluding her only reinforces the dynamic she's reacting against. Melissa considered this with characteristic fairness. You're right. As uncomfortable as her behavior has been, her central fear is legitimate. She feels replaced and marginalized, watching the children consistently choose us over her. The problem, I pointed out, is that she created an environment where the children felt they had to choose in the first place. Family relationships aren't zero-sum games. Before Melissa could respond, a knock at our suite door announced the arrival of Antonio, our butler, with the morning's fresh fruit platter. As he arranged the colorful display on our dining table, he discreetly mentioned, "Mr. Foster is in the corridor asking to speak with you, Mrs. Reynolds." Surprised, I exchanged glances with Melissa. "Please show him in." James entered looking as though he'd barely slept, though his appearance was as carefully groomed as ever. He declined Antonio's offer of coffee, waiting until the butler had discreetly withdrawn before speaking. "I apologize for dropping by so early," he began, his usual confident demeanor noticeably subdued. "Not at all," I assured him. "Is everything all right with the children?" "They're fine, having breakfast in the Ocean View Cafe with the youth staff." He hesitated, then added, "Victoria and I thought they could use some time without adult tension this morning." The phrasing, "Victoria and I thought," suggested at least some level of unified decision-making despite last night's conflict. "Please sit down," Melissa invited, gesturing to our veranda seating. "The view is particularly beautiful as we approach Sicily." James joined us outside, his gaze briefly captured by the majestic coastline emerging from the morning mist. For a moment, he seemed to gather his thoughts, staring out at the horizon before turning back to us. "I owe you both an apology," he said finally. "Particularly you, Mom." The directness of his statement caught me by surprise. James had always struggled with straightforward acknowledgement of mistakes, a trait he'd inherited from his father. What happened at dinner last night was the culmination of issues that existed long before this cruise, he continued. Victoria and I spent most of the night talking, really talking, perhaps for the first time in months, about expectations, about family dynamics, about the patterns we've fallen into. "That sounds like a positive step," I offered cautiously. "It was necessary," he agreed, "and overdue." He turned to face me directly. "Mom, I need to specifically apologize for breaking my promise about this cruise, the promise I made to you and Dad. There's no excuse for how I handled that." The simple acknowledgement, delivered without qualifications or deflections, touched something deep within me. For 10 years, I'd waited for this recognition of the promise's importance, not just as a vacation plan, but as a connection to Richard and his final wishes. "Thank you, James," I said softly. "That means a great deal to me." He nodded, then turned to Melissa. "And to you, I haven't been fair about your relationship with the children. I've allowed Victoria's insecurities to influence how I perceived your parenting, sometimes acting as though you were competing with us rather than simply being their mother." Melissa's expression softened. "Co-parenting after divorce is challenging for everyone. We've all been finding our way, some more gracefully than others," James acknowledged with a rueful smile. "The children have never stopped needing both of their parents, regardless of our marital status. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way." The maturity and self-awareness in his words struck me forcefully. This was a different James than the conflict-avoidant son who had uninvited me from the cruise just a week earlier. "What happens now?" I asked. "With the Sicily excursion? With Santorini? With the remainder of the cruise?" James ran a hand through his hair, that familiar nervous gesture again. "Victoria has decided to take a day for herself today. She's booked a spa package and plans to reflect on our conversation. The children will join you for Taormina as planned." "And tomorrow? Santorini?" Melissa pressed gently. "The children will do the photography tour with you," he confirmed. "Victoria and I will visit Akrotiri separately. We're trying to establish a balance, respecting the children's preferences, while also maintaining some couple time for us to continue working through these issues." That sounds like a thoughtful approach, I said, genuinely impressed by this evidence of careful consideration rather than Victoria's usual unilateral decisions or James's habitual path of least resistance. It's a start, he acknowledged. We have a lot more to discuss when we return home. He hesitated, then added, Victoria has agreed to consider counseling, for her individually and for us as a couple. The significance of this concession wasn't lost on me. For someone as image-conscious as Victoria, acknowledging the need for professional help represented a substantial shift. I'm glad to hear that, I said carefully. Family relationships are complex, especially in blended situations. Outside perspective can be invaluable. James nodded, then glanced at his watch. I should check on the children before your excursion. The youth staff is wonderful, but Noah can be a handful when he gets excited about exploring new places. As he rose to leave, he paused, seeming to debate whether to share something more. Finally, he said, There's something else you should know. Something Victoria revealed during our talk last night. Oh? I prompted, when he didn't immediately continue. She grew up in a family where affection was conditional and strictly limited, he explained. Her father left when she was young, and her mother remarried a man who made it clear Victoria was merely tolerated, not welcomed. When her half-siblings were born, she was systematically marginalized within her own family. That explains some of her insecurity, Melissa observed with professional insight. She's recreating the dynamic she experienced, but putting herself in the controlling position instead of the vulnerable one. Exactly, James agreed. It doesn't excuse her behavior, but it helps me understand it. She genuinely fears being discarded, replaced, as she was in her childhood home. The revelation added a layer of complexity to my perception of Victoria. While her actions remained problematic, glimpsing the wounded child beneath the controlling adult awakened a flicker of compassion I hadn't previously felt. Understanding origins is the first step toward changing patterns, I said, thinking of my own journey through grief counseling after Richard's death. I hope the therapeutic process is helpful for both of you. After James departed, Melissa and I sat in thoughtful silence, processing the unexpected depth of his reflections. He's changing, Melissa noted finally. This cruise has forced confrontations he's been avoiding for years. For all of us, I added, recognizing how this journey had pushed me beyond my own comfortable patterns of accommodation and conflict avoidance. As we prepared for our Sicilian adventure, I couldn't help reflecting on the strange alchemy of this vacation. How what began as a simple desire to finally experience the Mediterranean cruise I'd been promised had catalyzed profound shifts in family dynamics that extended far beyond the journey itself. In Taormina that day, walking ancient streets with my grandchildren and former daughter-in-law, I felt a growing sense that regardless of what happened between James and Victoria, something essential had been reclaimed. Not just my dream voyage, but authentic connections too long subordinated to artificial harmony. That evening, watching the sunset from our veranda as Sicily receded in the distance, Melissa voiced what I'd been thinking. Tomorrow's Santorini, she said quietly. The place Richard most wanted you to see. How are you feeling about that? Ready, I replied, surprised by the peaceful certainty in my voice. After all these years of waiting and deferring, I'm finally ready to fulfill that promise to him and to myself. The Mediterranean princess continued its eastward journey through the gathering darkness, carrying us all toward destinations both physical and emotional that none of us could have fully anticipated when we first set sail. Santorini appeared on the horizon like a dream manifested, a crescent of whitewashed buildings perched atop volcanic cliffs, their iconic blue domes capturing the morning light like sapphires against the stark landscape. As the Mediterranean princess approached the caldera, passengers gathered along the rails, cameras raised to capture the spectacular approach. Among them, I stood transfixed, one hand gripping the polished teak railing, the other pressed against my heart, where I carried Richard's final whispered request. See those blue domes in Santorini someday, Ellie, and remember us. Grandma, Noah's voice pulled me from my reverie. He'd appeared beside me, Linda following close behind. Are you okay? You're crying. I hadn't realized tears were streaming down my face until he mentioned it. Happy tears, I assured him, pulling a tissue from my pocket. This place meant a great deal to your grandfather. Seeing it for the first time is overwhelming. Linda slipped her arm through mine, leaning her head against my shoulder in silent understanding. At 14, she possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes startled me, a capacity to recognize the complex interplay of joy and grief that characterized my long-delayed arrival at this destination. "Grandpa would be glad you made it," she said softly. Melissa joined us at the railing, camera in hand to document the approach. "It's even more beautiful than the photographs," she observed, capturing the cascade of white buildings that seemed to flow down the volcanic cliffside. Our photography tour was scheduled to begin shortly after docking, offering the perfect opportunity to experience Santorini through the lens of Richard's artistic appreciation. He had been an amateur photographer, his carefully composed vacation pictures filling dozens of albums in our home. This professional tour, focused on capturing the island's distinctive architecture and breathtaking vistas, felt like the perfect tribute to his memory. As we prepared to disembark, I spotted James and Victoria on a lower deck, also admiring the approaching island. They stood side by side but not touching, their body language suggesting the polite distance of colleagues rather than the intimacy of spouses. When Victoria happened to glance up and notice us watching, she offered a small, stiff nod of acknowledgement. Not warmth, certainly, but a step back from open hostility. "Progress," Melissa murmured, noting the exchange. "Of a sort." Our guide, Nikos, met us at the port, a sun-bronzed local photographer in his 50s with an infectious enthusiasm for his island home and its photogenic qualities. He led us away from the crowded main paths, up narrow whitewashed staircases, and through hidden passages that opened suddenly onto spectacular viewpoints unknown to typical tourists. "This is where light and shadow perform their most beautiful dance," he explained, positioning Linda to capture the contrast between brilliant white walls and the deep blue sea beyond. Photography is not about recording what exists, but about revealing what others might miss. Throughout the morning, Nikos guided us through Oya's labyrinthine streets, teaching simple techniques for composition and lighting, while sharing stories of the island's volcanic history and cultural evolution. The children absorbed his instruction with genuine interest, experimenting with angles and perspectives as they documented the iconic landscape. For me, however, the technical aspects of photography soon faded into the background, as the emotional significance of my presence here overwhelmed all else. This was it, the place Richard and I had planned to visit together in our retirement, the destination he had made me promise to see, even as cancer claimed him. The dream deferred for a decade as life and others' priorities repeatedly intervened. Nikos, perceiving my emotional state with the sensitivity of someone attuned to capturing human expression, gently guided me to a small, private terrace overlooking the caldera. "Take a moment," he suggested kindly. "Sometimes we must fully arrive in a place before we can properly see it." Left alone on the sun-warmed terrace, I closed my eyes, feeling the Mediterranean breeze against my face. "I made it, Richard," I whispered to the husband who had been gone for 10 years, but whose presence I felt more strongly in this moment than I had in years. I kept my promise. When I rejoined the group, I found myself approaching the experience with renewed clarity and presence. No longer simply documenting the visit for Richard's sake, I began truly seeing Santorini through my own eyes, appreciating its dramatic beauty, its interplay of natural and human-made elements, its timeless quality that had drawn travelers for generations. By mid-afternoon, as we stopped for a leisurely lunch at a cliffside taverna, I realized something had shifted within me. The promise to Richard had been fulfilled, but more importantly, I had reclaimed something for myself, the ability to experience joy in the present moment, rather than perpetually deferring happiness to some future time when others' needs and priorities might finally allow space for my own. "You seem different," Melissa observed as we shared a plate of fresh calamari overlooking the sparkling caldera. "More peaceful." "I feel different," I acknowledged. For 10 years, Santorini has represented something just out of reach, a promise unfulfilled, a dream deferred. Now that I'm actually here, I realize the significance wasn't just about seeing this specific place. It was about finally prioritizing something meaningful to me, regardless of others' convenience. The children, momentarily distracted by a friendly local cat visiting our table, didn't hear this exchange, but Melissa nodded with understanding. Sometimes the journeys that matter most are internal, rather than geographical. As we continued our exploration through the afternoon, I found myself fully present in a way I hadn't been for years, noticing details with fresh perception, laughing unreservedly at Noah's antics, engaging deeply with each experience rather than mentally cataloging what I would tell others later. This, I realized, was the true gift of finally making this journey. Not just checking off a destination, but reclaiming my capacity for genuine joy and engagement. Our tour concluded at sunset, positioned perfectly to capture the famous Santorini twilight as the sinking sun transformed the white buildings to gold, then rose, then deepening purple. As Nikos guided the children in capturing this spectacular light show, I stood slightly apart, committing the scene to memory in a way no photograph could fully convey. "Mom?" I turned to find James standing a few feet away, having apparently sought us out after his separate excursion with Victoria. He looked somehow younger in the golden light, reminiscent of the sensitive boy he'd been before adult complications had layered him with protective caution. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I said, gesturing toward the panoramic vista. "Breathtaking," he agreed, moving to stand beside me. After a moment's silence, he added, "Dad would have loved this." "He would," I confirmed, touched by this acknowledgement of Richard's absence. He talked about Santorini constantly during his final weeks, something about the resilience of it, a place that endured despite volcanic destruction and rebuilding. James nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I remember. He made me promise to bring you here someday." He turned to me, genuine remorse in his expression. "I'm sorry it took so long to fulfill that promise, and that in the end, it wasn't even me who made it happen. But I'm here now," I said gently. "That's what matters." As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold, I felt Richard's presence more tangibly than I had in years, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as the culmination of a journey begun a decade earlier with his whispered request. The promise had been kept, not in the way either of us had imagined, through the twisting paths of family dynamics and unexpected alliances, but kept nonetheless. And in that fulfillment, I found not just closure for the past, but unexpected clarity about the future. Whatever came next, for James and Victoria, for the children, for Melissa and me, this moment of completion would remain a foundation for all that followed. Something precious had been reclaimed here on this volcanic island perched between sea and sky. Not just a promised destination finally reached, but a self too long subordinated to others' priorities, finally remembered and honored. As we made our way back to the ship in the gathering dusk, Linda captured one final photograph, the 3 generations of us silhouetted against the Aegean twilight, our figures distinct yet connected, separate but part of a whole. The perfect image for the journey we'd all been navigating, both literally and figuratively, during this unexpected cruise. Our final evening aboard the Mediterranean Princess carried a bittersweet quality, the satisfying conclusion of a journey long anticipated, coupled with the natural wistfulness that accompanies all endings. The ship had begun its return journey toward Barcelona, our various Mediterranean adventures now transformed from anticipation to memory. Melissa and I had extended an invitation for a farewell dinner in our suite rather than the restaurant, arranging with Antonio for a special meal to be served on our spacious veranda. To our surprise, James had accepted on behalf of the entire family, including Victoria. Whether her inclusion represented genuine reconciliation or merely polite formality remained to be seen. "Are you nervous about having Victoria here?" Melissa asked as we prepared the veranda, arranging candles and fresh flowers to complement the sunset views. "Cautiously optimistic," I replied, smoothing the linen tablecloth. "After Santorini, something feels different, as though we've all moved beyond the initial reactions that dominated the early days of this cruise." James arrived first with the children, both Linda and Noah bubbling with excitement about the private dinner setting. "This is like a restaurant but better," Noah declared, immediately claiming a seat with the best view. "We can be as loud as we want." "Within reason," James cautioned with a smile, presenting me with a bouquet of fresh flowers he'd purchased from the ship's florist. "A small thank you for including us tonight." Victoria arrived moments later, her entrance noticeably hesitant compared to her usual confident demeanor. She carried a gift bag, which she handed to me with careful formality. "A token of appreciation for your hospitality," she explained, maintaining eye contact despite obvious discomfort. Inside was a beautiful blue and white ceramic from Santorini, a small vase decorated with the island's iconic windmills and dome churches. The gesture, unexpected and seemingly genuine, momentarily left me speechless. "It's lovely," I finally managed. "Thank you, Victoria." She nodded, a complexity of emotions crossing her face, before she composed herself. "I thought it might serve as a remembrance of your visit there, of the promise fulfilled." The specific acknowledgement that she understood the significance of Santorini in relation to Richard's final wish suggested conversations with James far deeper than I had imagined. Perhaps their late-night discussions had included more genuine sharing than mere conflict resolution. Dinner progressed with surprising ease, the tension that had characterized our previous gathering at Bella Luna notably absent. Victoria remained relatively quiet, but not sullen, occasionally contributing to the conversation without the defensive edge that had marked her earlier interactions. The children, relieved by the lack of adult conflict, reverted to their natural exuberance, eagerly sharing favorite moments from the cruise. "The Vatican was definitely the best," Linda declared with teenage certainty. "Those painted ceilings were incredible." "No way," Noah countered. "Santorini was the best. The way the buildings are all white and blue and stuck to the cliffs like they might slide off." "What about you, Mom?" Linda asked, turning to Melissa. "What was your favorite part?" Melissa considered the question thoughtfully. "Honestly, watching you two experience these places, seeing your reactions, your discoveries, that's been my highlight." "Sentimental answer," Linda teased, though her smile revealed how much she appreciated her mother's response. "What about you, Grandma?" Noah asked. "Was Santorini your favorite because of Grandpa?" The directness of his question created a brief silence at the table. Even Victoria seemed interested in my response, her attention shifting from her plate to my face. "Santorini was certainly special," I acknowledged, "but my favorite part of this cruise wasn't a place at all. It was reclaiming something I'd almost forgotten, how to prioritize my own joy instead of always deferring it for others' convenience." James winced slightly at the gentle rebuke embedded in my answer, but nodded in acknowledgement. "A lesson some of us have been slow to learn," he admitted. "But better late than never, right?" As dinner concluded and Antonio served dessert, a decadent chocolate creation that prompted enthusiastic approval from Noah, James cleared his throat with the air of someone preparing for a significant statement. "Before we finish this evening, I'd like to say something," he began, an unusual formality in his tone. "This cruise has unfolded in ways none of us anticipated. It's revealed patterns and priorities that weren't entirely healthy." Victoria studied her dessert plate with intense focus, but didn't interrupt or contradict him. "Mom," he continued, turning to me, "I want to apologize again for breaking my promise about this trip, for allowing other considerations to override a commitment that meant so much to you and Dad. That was wrong. And to me," he added, addressing Melissa, "I'm sorry for not always recognizing and respecting your role as the children's mother. You've been an incredible parent, and the kids are fortunate to have you." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't mere placation, but genuine acknowledgement, the kind of emotional honesty James had often struggled to express. "Victoria and I have been doing a lot of talking," he continued, reaching over to briefly touch his wife's hand, "about changes we need to make going forward, about healthier family dynamics for everyone." Victoria finally looked up. "I haven't made things easy," she admitted, her voice lacking its usual defensive edge. "My own insecurities. They don't excuse how I've behaved, but they help explain it. I'm working to do better." The admission, clearly difficult for someone as pride-driven as Victoria, carried a weight beyond the simple words. Not a complete transformation, certainly, but a tentative step towards self-awareness that hadn't been present when we boarded this ship 8 days ago. As the Mediterranean night enfolded us in stars and sea breeze, our conversation shifted to future plans. Not grand promises, but modest intentions. Sunday dinners reinstated, holiday traditions honored, boundaries respected, small, achievable commitments replacing sweeping declarations too easily broken. When the children finally began yawning despite their attempts to prolong the evening, James signaled it was time to depart. The goodbye carried none of the tension or artifice of our previous interactions, just the natural conclusion of a shared experience that had, against all expectations, become meaningful for everyone involved. After they left, Melissa and I lingered on the veranda, watching the ship's wake stretch silver across the dark Mediterranean. "Do you think things will actually change?" she asked softly. "Or will old patterns reassert themselves once we're home?" "Some change seems inevitable," I replied thoughtfully. "Whether it's enough or lasts, that remains to be seen. But something has shifted, for all of us." As Barcelona's lights appeared on the distant horizon the following morning, marking our imminent return to regular life, I felt surprisingly peaceful about whatever might come next. This voyage, begun in rejection and vindication, transformed through confrontation and reflection, had delivered far more than the promised Mediterranean vistas. It had returned to me something essential that had gradually eroded through years of accommodation and deferred dreams, the certainty that my needs, my joy, my priorities deserved space and respect, not selfishly claimed at others' expense, but rightfully honored as part of the family equation. Richard would have appreciated that outcome even more than the blue domes of Santorini, and as I prepared to disembark, I carried both achievements with equal pride. The external journey finally completed, and the internal one unexpectedly discovered along the way.